Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Chris Jones, who's Executive VP Marketing and Services at Descartes. And today we're going to talk about, have you missed the most valuable aspect of your transportation management solution? Now, transportation cost savings is probably the number one reason companies invest in a TMS, but does the value go beyond that? When it comes to getting the most value from a transportation management systems, what can we learn from the leaders in the industry? Well, that's going to be the main focus of our conversation today, and it's great to have Chris on the program, who's going to share some insights and advice based on some benchmarking studies that they've done recently. So, Chris, welcome to the program.
Great, thanks, Adrian.
So, Chris, before we dive into some of the insights from the benchmarking studies, let's talk about the current market for TMS, for transportation management systems. I mean, did the challenges that shippers and 3PLs and others faced last year with finding capacity and increased rates, managing costs, I mean, did that increase demand for TMS? I mean, what conversations are you having with customers and prospects today as it relates to TMS?
Well, one of the things we did determine in the benchmark is that spending is up and the intent to spend is up. So I would say everything that you just mentioned has really been an impetus for people to spend more in transportation management. You could even add, the whole competitive differentiation aspect of it and so forth. So I would say overall interest is, pretty high at this point, probably as high as it's been that I can remember.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about TMS for me is that, when it's a strong demand regardless of the market environment, right? When things are tough, when the economy is down and companies are trying to tighten their belt, demand is high because companies look for perhaps potential cost savings in transportation, and that drives demand. But when the economy is strong, they're looking for a TMS in order to grow and scale and manage operations more effectively. Or you have things like on time and full that are kind of creating more challenging service requirements. So that helps drive TMS. So it's one of those market spaces, I think, that regardless of the market conditions, there's always a good reason to invest in the TMS, right?
Yeah, I would say so. And to your point on growth, that is really one of the top drivers. Growth, customer service, costs is always out there. But from what we see is that that's kind of an expectation, particularly for management. You don't get a lot of credit for it, even when you do a great job at it. What they're looking for is really the other two.
Great. So let's talk now about the benchmarking, studies. So before we kind of get into details, I mean, first, what are these studies? And secondly, why do you do them?
Well, we thought about this over the last, probably this is our fourth year in terms of the ones that we've done. And what we wanted to do was we get a lot of customers we deal with and just companies in general we talk to, and they are in varying states of I'll call it transportation capability. And by the way, I'm mentioning not just the classic truckload or LTL type things, but fleets and pretty much every mode. And what we see is that some people do a phenomenal job in transportation management. They not only are well run, but it becomes a key part of their story to compete in the market and grow revenue. And so we were really curious, what is it about those companies in their strategies, tactics, and technology that's different versus the folks where they don't get it, simply put. And so that was really the genesis of this. And we've launched a couple of them. We do one for the fleet space. We do one for, I'll call the general transportation management space. And then we actually do one for forwarders and brokers that you could say related, but it's the logistics service providers community. And we've been doing, like I said, for about 4 years. So this has been pretty eye-opening for us. And it's really, I think it helps companies understand what other people are doing and how they're thinking. And the feedback that I typically get is, can I show this to my management? Because it's the connection to, what other people are doing. And maybe the last point I would just make quickly is that this study isn't just about Descartes customers. We work with a number of publishing partners to really build out the responses. And, over the last 4 years, I think we're somewhere just under about 2,000 responded. So really pretty exciting.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that the points you mentioned are is what I hear as well. I mean, for those companies that already have a TMS, sometimes they know they're not getting the full value out of it, or that they can be getting more. So they're always interested to see how others who have a TMS are kind of leveraging it across their organizations. And even those, I always laugh because even this day and age, there's still many companies out there that don't have a TMS. They're still using spreadsheets and fax machines and so forth. And I was talking to a company just recently that's kind of in that boat right now, and they're kind of thinking about a TMS. And one of the questions he asked me was, what are some leading practices in terms of, the business case or the value, for TMS, because you wanted to position that as broadly as possible to their, management team. Because I think you're right, to your point. I mean, I think the cost savings is kind of table stakes, these days. And I think that there's a lot of wealth of information out there in terms of, the fact that TMS, if you do it right, can save you on the cost front. But what else beyond that, right? To drive as much value as possible. So let's look at the study results. I mean, when you look at them, and I mean, what ultimately separates? What are some of those high level things that ultimately separates the top performers from everybody else?
Well, I think one of the first things is just to kind of give people a little bit of a view of what we try to do. So we ask a number of questions, and let's say about 25, and they're across a whole number of areas. And two of the questions that we ask are, how well is your company doing financially? All right, so it's a self-select here. And then the second one is, what is management's view of transportation management? And there we're looking at it from the point of view of everything from they believe it's a competitive weapon down through it's a necessary evil. All right. And what we find is when you actually cross-reference these questions, what you see is the people where management gets the value of it being beyond just getting goods there are the ones that actually do much better financially. So you can almost say that for the folks that aren't really leveraging their transportation management capabilities, that it's almost like tying one arm behind your back in terms of your business's ability to compete. We also found out that they're the fastest growing companies as well. So again, some really interesting data that kind of then shapes how we look at the rest of this. From there, I'd say one of the ones I'd like to focus on is, and I think very important, is in how you measure transportation value. Okay, so for a lot of people, they get really stuck in what I call that four walls view, which is it's about cost, and then it's about customer service. And when I describe that, that's the on time and full story. And those are traditional supply chain metrics. And then when you look at, I call it the beyond supply chain, like contribution to revenue and contribution to competitive differentiation, the answers drop off. Now the top performers do a way better job, okay, than the folks that that don't, okay, the bottom performers, if you will. But in all cases, what we see is if you're doing a better job at measuring value, you can really get your story across. And this is part of where it's so important here. It's if you're only measuring your success in one or two dimensions here, you really set yourself up for missed opportunity. So that was one of the key points.
And I think, related to that, one of the things I always hear a lot from folks is, generally, particularly in transportation, is, they're always looking for ways to tie the value of what they do, or at least transportation metrics, if you will, to, metrics that, the CEO and the CFO can sink their teeth into, right? So things that appear on the balance sheet and the P&L, right? And being able to make those connections. And obviously, I think it comes to the fact that there's a lot of data and information within a TMS that goes beyond the transportation, that can be leveraged across the organization, just beyond transportation, right?
Yeah, Adrian, it's, think of it this way. One, transportation management, or transportation, if you will, is a multi-party process. You have could be your suppliers, your carriers, could be within your own organization, obviously your customers and so forth. So it touches a lot of different people. That information has value to different constituencies. So the ability to share that information across those different constituencies is really important. So one of the things that we did in the study was we literally asked people to say, where do you share information? And that starts like within the four walls of transportation, goes out through I'll call it the internal supply chain, all right, distribution, procurement, things like that, and then goes on beyond that to sales, customer service, and then ultimately to your customers and suppliers and carriers. As you can imagine, again, there's a lot of people that do the sharing down at the, within the four-wall space. But equally, what we see then is the better performers do a way better job of sharing with customers, sharing with suppliers, and even within their own organization. And what that does is it provides ways to drive efficiency, increase the customer experience, just a number of things like that. So this is where probably, again, one of the areas that's probably most missed. So what we need people to think about is transportation execution is important, all right, but the information is getting to be equally as important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned, customer experience, and that was, I had the opportunity to attend your user conference recently, and that was the theme of the conference was customer experience. And there were, several, great case studies there that I think tie into what we're talking about today. I mean, can you share either from the survey results or from just your experience working with customers? Can you share some customer examples that kind of relate to this? I mean, and what can we learn from these, these customers?
Sure. So what I'd like people to think about here is the following, which is what can you do with the information, or what could the customer do with the information if they had it in the, I'll call it in the right time, in the right form to improve the value of their business. So BASF is a customer of ours doing real-time visibility through the Descartes MacroPoint solution. And for them, it's sharing that information. They move large bulk chemicals, so their customers are larger facilities that, it's important for them to understand what's coming inbound. It allows them to make decisions on what they're actually producing, and if you will, have an understanding if there's going to be any kind of disruption. Process-based industries don't always turn on a dime, so that kind of information is really important for them. The same thing, if you will, we see in things like the building trades. The one that hits home to me the most is we have a couple customers, USLBM and BC Sands, that serve contractors. All right, and when you think about a contractor, their biggest single variable cost is their crew. All right, so for them, it's really important to make sure that the goods show up when they're supposed to, in the form they're supposed to, because if the crew is there and the goods aren't, they're still paying for the crew, and it's basically lost productivity here. So having an application, and that's exactly what the USLBM folks did, was to provide basically contractors with an app that allows them to track their deliveries, understand what's been delivered, because again, this isn't simple things that are always in cardboard boxes on pallets, right? It's loose material, etc. Windows, they want to understand things like damage and so forth if it's happened. And then knowing when it's coming, all right, or that it's got there, is really important for them to then be more efficient and effective in how they leverage their crew. So they've created a tremendous amount of stickiness with those customers, those contractors, by providing that kind of information to them.
Yeah, no, those are both great examples. And the BASF one, I mean, I had the opportunity to interview, some of the executives there at a user conference the year before, and did a great video interview. So those of you that are interested, you can check on Talking Logistics and search for BASF, and you'll be able to find that video interview. I think that my key takeaway is that, in particular with those key examples there, is again going back to the fact that I think if I go back to when I first started as an industry analyst, 20 plus years ago, a lot of folks used to think about transportation and transportation management systems as this application that was used by just a handful of people, down in the bowels of the transportation department. I think if you fast forward today, the companies like the examples you just gave and those that are, leading the way, they're really viewing, transportation management systems as an enterprise application that has got a wealth of data where the users go way beyond just, your transportation department. They include all those other functional groups that you mentioned before, as well as your suppliers and your customers, providing them with that visibility to create that enhanced customer experience and help them manage their operations, more effectively as well, right?
Yeah, so I think of a customer I was with last week. Unfortunately, I just can't mention their name, but they're a large retailer, and we do multimodal inbound visibility, global inbound visibility for them. And their single biggest user is their merchants, if you will, their buyers. And those buyers are really the ones that drive the supply chain. So if you think of the order button and hitting the order button, in terms of purchasing more goods, that's all of a sudden really what triggers the action in the supply chain. And in this particular case, next to a DC, they have in Toronto, they had a huge yard, 3 high with 40-foot containers. That yard doesn't exist anymore. And it had really nothing to do with them being more efficient in their supply chain operations. It had them being more educated in their buying decisions. And so this to me is another great, I'll call it collateral benefit that we see here. We also see it in warehouse operations, particularly for dynamic businesses where you have a fleet out there that's constantly coming and going. You need to know which truck is going to come in the door and have the right materials staged. You can't do it at the beginning of the day in a lot of cases and just say it's going to happen, because as we all know, once you put a truck on the road, it's not necessarily always going to go the way you expect it to, right? So these are really other good examples of taking advantage of that kind of information.
No, absolutely. Well, Chris, we're running short on time here, so I'm just going to get to my last question here. I mean, as a way to wrap up and summarize. I mean, when it comes to getting the most value from a TMS, then at the end of the day, I mean, what does it take? I mean, what mindset should companies have, and what action should they take to get the most value from it?
Well, I'd like to say that supply chain folks need to be better salespeople, and what I mean by that is go out and get the attention of the person who owns the customer. That's really where you want to get to. So if it's the head of sales or store operations, or whoever that person is, and really talk to them about what it is they're trying to get done and what they see with their customers and the challenges that they have. And if you can get to those kinds of folks, then all of a sudden you break this traditional, I call it supply chain glass ceiling, right? Where you're stuck in the get it done space. Now you're talking about getting more. So to me, that is like the first and foremost thing. And then the second one, as I mentioned earlier, is it's what you measure. Being top of mind is always good in terms of being able to say, hey, here's the business that came because we were able to do certain things in transportation, right? So a little bit of self-promotion here is not a bad thing. It's actually really beneficial for the company.
No, I love those 2 words of advice. It reminded me of a story. The first advice, in terms of finding that partner, if you will, internally that owns the customer, if you will, and that's exactly what happened. I came across, maybe it was 10 years ago. The VP of logistics, got together with the VP of sales. This was in grocery, CPG company. And they work together to position to the clients, the grocery stores, the fact that, hey, tell us what you need in terms of, hey, you want to order in smaller sizes, you want more frequent deliveries, because they've got the technology, the people, the know-how, the infrastructure, the network design, we can do that. So the idea was, hey, we can probably get more shelf space because we can meet your more demanding, customer requirements. And they went in there together, logistics and sales to the customers to make that pitch. So I think that's a great words of advice there. Well, Chris, I know that you're going to be releasing or talking about more of these results from the benchmarking studies coming up. So they could probably find this out more at the Descartes website. Absolutely.
There's one on next Tuesday at 2:00. That's for people that have fleets, and the one on purchase transportation is also at 2:00 on Thursday. We'll be making the documents that we put together to go through the whole process here. We're going to talk about strategies, tactics, technology. We're going to be talking about things like capacity, which has been such a hot issue, and how that's impacting folks. Really in both of those studies. So we structure them pretty much the same way. So there's a lot, I think, good insights there for people, and really help you understand what other folks are doing, and if you will, why they're so much better off.
Great. So we, hopefully we gave folks enough of a taste that, today of some of the insights that came out of those studies, and they can, be able to join next week in those 2 webinars to kind of get more details and some more of the content behind those benchmarking studies. So Chris, again, thank you for making the time to be with us today and share some insights on this, I think, very important topic.
All right. Well, thank you, Adrian.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us today. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Descartes website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Chris, you can post it there. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.